Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harilos Aniziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We're continuing covering the games suggested to me by my Facebook friends, and we continue with the Grandmaster from Georgia, Tamas Gelashvili. He had recommended two games yesterday. In the previous video, we covered the previous one that was against his countryman, the Grandmaster from Georgia, Merab Kagunashvili, and now we'll continue with the second game that he suggested against Varchun Akobian, who is a grandmaster currently representing the United States of America. The game took place in the year 2016 at the 44th World Open Tournament in Philadelphia. On the weekend of July 4th in Philadelphia, in the United States, they have the so-called World Open Tournament with thousands of chess players participating in all various sections, and some of the best participate, of course, at the top section. And this was from the year 2016. And once again, the opponents are Tamas Gelashvili from Georgia against Varuchan Akobian for the United States. When they played, my Facebook friend Tamas had a rating of 25.56, while his opponent Varuchan had a rating of 26.24, meaning that Varuchan was the favorite. Currently, both players have fallen a little bit. Tamas from 25.56 to 25.41, and Varuchan from 26.24 to 25.49. We're going to connect to the chessboard of chess.com, share the screen with you. And we are going to see what happened in the game. As not always, as most of the times, I'm going to enter the moves by hand, copying from the score sheet, move by move. The computer is going to tell us who do they think is doing better. Positive number means white is doing better. And by the way, my Facebook friend Tamas Gelashvili has the white pieces. If you see a negative number, it means that his opponent, Varuchana Kobian, is doing better. Computer will also tell us if the move played was the best or not, and if not, which move would have been the best, and also what are the top 5 moves for the other player whose turn is to come. And we start the game with Tamas pushing his pawn to d4. This is the, I would say, the second most popular opening after the pawn going to a4, but these two are almost the same in popularity. And Varuchan replies with pushing the pawn to e6. So we start with the queen's pawn opening, that is pawn to d4, and now we have, and the openings will change names every little in a while. That's exciting to see. It's called the Horowitz defense. I'm also learning with you. Second move for Tamas, knight goes to f3. And second move for Varuchan, knight goes to f6. Develop the knights. Now the opening is called Indian game Knight's Variation, because this looks as if Black had started with knight going to f6, the first move, that is the Indian opening. Third move for Tamas, pawn goes to e3, and that is what's called the Indian game Yusupov-Rubinstein system. Pawn to c5 for Varuchan, the third move. Bishop to d3 for Tamas, and pawn to d5 for Varuchan. What's happening is that players, little by little, developing their pieces, pushing pawns to control the center. That is the standard way where games are starting, especially with the top players. Pawn to b3 for Tamas. And now we have an opening called the Kohler system Rubinstein opening. This means that players try to surprise each other by mixing up various moves from various systems. And Varujan is going to push his knight to d7. And we have just left theory. Computer says it's excellent, although would rather have the bishop go to d6. And we completed the first 5 moves, and white is slightly ahead by 0.29 in the computer evaluation. You can see it here. And this is usually because white starts first, a small advantage, not significant yet. And let's continue. Castling for Tamás, pawn to b6 for Varuchan. He's trying to fianchetto his bishop, since the knight on d7 and the pawn on e6 are blocking the bishop on c8. Varuchan will try to send his bishop to b7 to fianchetto it, so it controls the large diagonal, the long diagonal that goes from h1 to a8. Next move. Both sides fianchetto, bishop to b2 for Tamás and bishop to b7 for Varuchan. Knight to d2 for Tamás and bishop to d6 to Varuchan. And knight to e8, and now this knight is moved for the second time. White has almost completed the development, only the queen stays on d1 and feels ready to send the knight to e5. Castling kingside, castling for Varuchan. And now, Tamás wants to open the board and control more space. Pawn to f4. What this means is that Varuchan cannot easily exchange take the knight on e5 by using his knight on d7, because if the knight on d7 takes the knight on e5, then when Tamás recovers, whether with the d or the f pawn, there is a fork, and Tamás will win a piece. But the computer doesn't like it, thinks it's inaccuracy, would rather have the queen go to e2, and by doing so, white completes the development. Rook to c8 for Varuchan. Computer doesn't like it either, thinks it's inaccuracy, would rather have the pawn from c5 take the pawn on d4. We completed the first 10 moves. White has still a small advantage of 0.35. Tamás is going to initiate the exchange of the knights. Takes knight on d7, and Varuchan also uses the knight from f6 to take on d7. We exchange now pawns on c5. And computer thinks that this is a miss, would rather have the bishop take on c5. If the bishop took on c5, it is threatening the pawn on e3 with a check, and white will have to think how to reply to that. But now they don't have to worry about it, and white continues what is usually called the Greek gift. It's called the Greek gift because it's an analogy with the Trojan War, where the Greeks gave the Trojans as a gift the wooden horse, but once the Trojans accepted it, it ended up to their defeat, because inside the wooden horse there were hidden soldiers that came out at night and they conquered the city of Troy. By analogy, the bishop goes to h7. This is called the Greek gift. It's a check. White wins a pawn. It's a brilliant move because black either needs to accept the fact that they have a pawn less and the king is very exposed and send the king to h8, for example. Or if they take the bishop, materially they are ahead, but look what's going to happen. And the computer tells you in advance that white's move is brilliant. And you see here, black has 2 moves. If they take the bishop, they're behind, but not too much. If they don't, they're back by 9.12. The game is over. So Varuchan is going to take the bishop, accepts the gift, and follow up as expected. Queen to h5 with a check. Great move, but of course, once you start the Greek gift, this is the only way to continue. White, this case for white is more difficult, more complicated than the usual Greek gift, because usually white has a knight on f3 and sends it to g5 to check. Now white is trying the same idea, but without the knight, with a piece less, and a very important piece. Let's see if it's going to work out. Computer thinks so. But once you start this route by sacrificing your bishop, you'd better have a great follow-up, otherwise you're done a piece. King to g8, only legal move for Sun, is forced as a computer, and they have the arrow pointing to the right. This means that the move is forced. And now, how will Tamas continues? Second sacrifice, he sacrifices his other bishop, goes to g7. You see that this is the only move here. If Tamas tries anything else to do, they're behind, at least by 1.07. Bishop goes to g7, another brilliant move. Computer would rather have the pawn go to f5 because Tamas is threatening checkmate. Queen goes to h8 checkmate. Computer thinks that white is ahead no matter what, but black would minimize the damage by sending the pawn to f5 instead. Tamas is going to recapture the bishop. We completed the first 15 moves, and after the Greek gift of Tamas, white is ahead by 3.15, which starts becoming important. But once again, materially, if you see here, black is up by 4, plus 4 pawns. And white better be careful to follow up successfully, otherwise they'll end up in an ending with 2 pieces down. And let's see how game continues. Queen to g4 check for Tamas, king to h7 for Chan. Rook to f3, this is the rook lift, and the goal of that is rook goes to h3 and threatens with mate. Meaning if white could play a second move in a row, rook goes to h3, queen h4, rook takes at h4 and mate. But Farzan is not going to fall for that. Queen goes to f6, rook to h3 check, and the only move for black, in fact not the only, you see that you can also put the queen on h4 and be immediate checkmate, but the only reasonable one is queen to h6. White is going to win a queen for a rook, which is wonderful, everything else being equal, but since white is down by +4, this exchange will just make the material even. The win will not be so easy for white. And white decides not even to go directly for the exchange, because the queen is pinned, the queen cannot escape, so white will strengthen the attack by sending the knight to f3, bishop to e7 for Faruchan, and knight goes to g5 with a check. Great moves, says the computer, and the bishop of Aruchan will take the knight, Tamas' knight. We completed the first 20 moves, and Tamas with white is ahead by 4.40. On paper, he seems to be the favorite, but after this material sacrifice, even though he'll take back the queen, the material is going to be even. So Tamas will take the bishop, the pawn. Queen takes the rook, because otherwise the queen is lost for nothing. And Tamas will take, he's going to use his queen to take his opponent's queen. Check with king going to g8. The material now is even. Tamas will continue the attack with pawn to g6. If he could play a second move in a row, the queen to h7, it checkmate immediately. If Farjan moves the rook to give space to king, queen to h7, king to f8, and queen to f8 mate. But it's Farjan's turn to play, and he's going to use his f-pawn to win the g-pawn. Now queen will take the pawn on e6 with a check, king to g7. We're trying to see what would happen if rook went to f7, because this doesn't allow the white queen to win the black knight. Then computer says, let's give a look here. Rook goes to f1, knight to e5, queen to e8 check, king to h7, rook to f7, knight to f7, queen to f7, king to h6, and so on. So white would be on the way on to victory in a similar way that we'll see later. Queen against the rook and bishop. But in any case, since king went to g7, the white queen can easily take the black knight to d7, and rook goes to f7. Great moves in the computer once again. And rook goes to f7, not only to block the check, but also to protect the bishop on b7. We completed the first 25 moves. Now white is ahead by one piece, because the queen more or less matches the two rooks, and then white has rook versus bishop, and also white has extra pawns. Completed the first 25 moves, and Tamas with the white pieces is ahead by 4.74. The win is not trivial because the extra piece is not in the shape that every side has the same pieces and white only has one additional. The white has to deal with queen versus two rooks and rook versus bishop, and none of white's pawns is a passed pawn. So white, although the computer says white is ahead, needs to be very, very careful how to convert the advantage. Let's continue the game. Queen goes to d6 for white. Rook takes the pawn on c2. Rook to f1 for white. Since you're ahead, you want to exchange material. And Varujan is going to exchange the rooks. Bishop to c6 for Varujan. Otherwise, queen goes to d or e7 check and then with the bishop. Pawn to g4 for Tamas. Bishop going to b5 with a check for Akobian. King to g1. One other detail you may notice is that Black Varujan has his rook on the second rank, while the white king is on the first rank. So, in addition to any other material considerations, Black has the advantage of the rook on the second rank, blocking the king on or the opponent's king on the first rank, which will make more difficult Tamas's job, even though materially he's up by +2, and even though the computer says that overall he's up by plus 0.47. And Varujan is going to win another pawn on a2. And by doing so, the material advantage for Tamas is only +1, not very significant. But the computer thinks that white is ahead by 5.08 after the first 30 moves. But let's see how the game is going to continue. More or less, it's white's to lose, but white's win is far from trivial. White needs to be very careful. If for any reason they blunder the queen, white lost. And it's not so impossible to blunder the queen, because it's not enough not to leave it on praise. Black with the rook and the bishop may have a combination that can win white's queen, even if they have to sacrifice either the rook or the bishop. But let's see how game continues. Queen to e5 check for Tamas. King to h7 for Arushan. Pawn to g5 for Tamas wants to start pushing the pawns, even though none of them is a passed pawn. Bishop to d3 for Baruchan. Queen wins the pawn on d5 for Tamas. And now rook to a1 with a check for Baruchan. King to g2. Rook to d1 for Varuchan, and white need be careful. If white could do nothing, let's say if Varuchan could play a second move in a row, bishop goes to f2 with a check, and then rook wins the queen on d5. But let's see how game will continue. So of course, Tamas saw it and places his queen on b7 with a check, and king goes to g8. Now it is the other way around. While the white king has been liberated from the first rank, The black king is constrained on the 8th rank with the white queen on the 7th rank. And we completed the first 35 moves, and let's see what is going to happen next. Queen to a8 check for Tamas, king to g7 for Varuchan. The white queen takes the pawn on a7 for Tamas, king to g8, and the white queen wins another pawn on b6. There's no check now, so Varuchan has some time to recover. You see that Tamas is ahead by +4. Why? Because queen is 9, rook is 5, bishop 3, so queen versus bishop and rook is +1 already, and white has 4 versus 1 points, so plus another 3, 4. But more important, equally important, is that the pawns on b3 and d3 for Tamas are passed pawns, meaning they have no pawns to oppose them. So it's going to be very tough for Jan to block both pawns from continuing all the way to promote. Of course, they're still in the beginning, 3rd rank. They have a long way to go until promotion, but one cannot see how exactly they could be stopped. And Varujan continues with the bishop from e4 with a check. King to f2 for Damas, and bishop goes to f5. And Damas is going to push his pawn to e4. And you may be wondering, why should he give this wonderful free pawn to black? Because black can easily take it. But then what Damas is going to do is he's going to place his queen on e6 with a check and then win the black pawn. What else can black do to save the bishop? Can go, of course, g4 or h3, but in this case, the white queen is going to take the pawn on g6. White will have all 4 pawns of white will be passed because black has no pawns. Anywhere the black bishop goes, other than taking the pawn on e4, where the bishop will be lost, anywhere else the queen will take the pawn on g6 with a check, and then the black king has to go to either f8 or h8, and the white queen can go either f6 or h6, and sooner or later we'll have a fork and win one of black's pieces, in addition to the g6 pawn. That is why after the 40th move of Tamaz, where computers showed that Tamaz is leading by 6.83, Varujan resigned. Congratulations to Tamaz for this win as well. And let's see now, what does the computer think about the game? Let's see the computer review. 96.1 versus 89.5 accuracy. Tamaz, of course, has a better accuracy. The ratings 2500 for Tamaz, another 2500 near his actual rating, versus 2450 for Varujan, a little bit less than his actual rating. And in the various categories, 2 brilliant and 5 great moves for Tamaz, the total of 9 exclamation points, if you count them that way. Best moves. 15 for Tamaz versus 20 for Varujan. This means that out of the 40 moves, if you include also the book moves, Tamaz had 27, a little bit more than 2/3 as the optimal, the best moves. Excellent, 10 for Tamaz, 9 for Varujan. Good 1 for Tamaz, 3 for Varujan, and the book moves, 5 for Tamaz, 4 for Varujan. And in the negatives, 1 inaccuracy each and 1 mistake for Varujan. And this concludes the presentation of the 3 games from Tamaz Gelashvili. We have more games to come. We'll continue during the next few days by presenting the games of the other players. But in the meantime, let's give a look to see how are the tournaments going. grecochess, nothing has changed. 10 games remaining for the first round to be completed. And if you look at them, 6 of the 10 are the games of hunting achievements who still has not played the move and has 3 more weeks of vacation. Let's see if during the next 3 weeks, hunting achievements is going to have any move. Uh, Group 2 and 3, similar situations. You have in each group 2 players with 4 wins, and they face each other to determine who advances. In Group 2, it's Barak 7 from Israel versus MGC 89 from Brazil. Group 3, it's myself, Tehari from Greece versus the Line from Hungary. While in Group 4, my skin from Italy has already advanced. And let's see now how things are going in the other tournament. In the in Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament, where 81 players compete in 9 groups of 9. Score one by one the various groups. Group 1, Lotus Time Chess from Japan has 9 points, doing quite well. Group 2, Spider 9 from Egypt. Hope I got it right. Yes, he's leading with 7 points. In fact, both of these players have won all of their games. And Group 3, Silvio 888, no, excuse me, 8888 from Croatia is leading with 5 points. Group 4, Rishi Raj 3 from India is leading with 3 points. Group 5, Peon Perez from Palestine is leading with 8 points. Group 6, Swaki from Eswatini and Munza 44 from Croatia are leading with 7 points. Group 7, Gandalf 800, Gandalf 66 from Uzbekistan is leading with 7 points. Group 8, where I participate, and I'm not doing so well. Yes, I do have 2 points, but I have 2 wins and 5 losses. Things don't look so nice for me. We have uh, Khaled Kadab from Egypt leading with 3 points. And finally, in Group 9, Hikaru Carlsenthal is leading with 9 points. This concludes today's video. Thanks to all the viewers. Thanks to the subscribers. To subscribe is very simple. All you have to do is click the subscribe button. Thanks to the likes and to the encouraging comments. I'm Harry Lausaniziris. This is my YouTube channel, Greco Chess. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.